Whether you're a skeptic or a believer, join me, Rob McConnell, as together we'll investigate the world of the paranormal and the science of parapsychology here on the X-Zone Radio TV show on XZBN and the X-Zone TV channel on Simul TV. Since 1990, the X-Zone Radio TV show has been the place where people dare to believe and dare to be heard. Together, we'll investigate UFOs, aliens, ghosts, Bigfoot, psychic phenomenon, lake monsters, conspiracy theories, government cover-ups, the truth embargo, alien abductions, ESP, haunted locations from around the world, and so much more. With over 28 years of broadcasting and more than 4,500 individual guests, the X-Zone is truly a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality, as evidenced by the credibility, integrity, and professionalism of the guests that we bring to our international audience. If you have seen a UFO, had a close encounter, seen a ghost, Bigfoot, lake monster, or a story that you would like to share or have investigated, contact me, Rob McConnell, by sending me your email to xzone@xzoneradiotv.com, or you can call toll-free 1-800-610-7035, extension 143, and on Skype, X-Zone Radio TV. For more information on the X-Zone Radio TV show with yours truly, Rob McConnell, visit www.xzoneradiotv.com or www.xzonetvchannel.com or simultv.com and xzbn.net. Until next we meet here in the X-Zone from our broadcast center and studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, always remember, X-Zone Nation, keep your eyes to the sky and your heart in the light. Welcome to the Connecting with Coincidence radio show with Dr. Bernie Beitman, MD, bringing together the world's synchronicity experts to help you use meaningful coincidences to develop spiritually, psychologically, and practically. For more information, put Connecting with Coincidence into your web browser to find the book, website, Psychology Today blog, YouTube channel, and Facebook page. And now, here is the host of the Connecting with Coincidence radio show, Dr. Bernie Beitman, MD.
Yes. This is Dr. Bernie Beitman, MD, and this is Connecting with Coincidence. Over the past 8 years, I've had the distinct pleasure of communicating with a pair of trees in the forest near Charlottesville, Virginia. I call them the King and the Queen. Somehow they stopped me one day as I was walking by them, and we have begun and continue to have a relationship. I've danced with them, they advise me, they help me feel better, and we communicate with feeling and with telepathic words. They like me to sing to them. This song in particular, "The forest speaks to me, sometimes through the trees. The forest speaks to me, sometimes through the trees." Our guest today will tell us stories like this, how nature is far more conscious than we give her credit and is very willing to interact with us. Matthew Zylstra comes to us from Plettenberg Bay, South Africa. He is an integral ecologist with over 15 years of international experience in research, education, and facilitation of collaborative social-ecological change processes. Matthew has co-founded several conservation-oriented organizations and currently serves as a founding director for the Organization for Noetic Ecology, aimed at reimagining human-nature relationships. Matthew is a lead instructor for Wildlands Studies and since 2009 has led academic field study programs across Australia, New Zealand, as well as South Africa. He completed transdisciplinary research in 2014, which explored how meaningful experiences and nature connect and support transformative education for sustainability. He has a passion for deep embodied learning and currently designs curricula and facilitates immersive programs and experiential workshops that ultimately serve to cultivate connections between people and nature. Matthew, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Bernard. It's a pleasure to be here.
What you're doing is really wonderful. I'm glad you could take the time to join us, because as I tried to indicate at the top of the show, I am very much involved with communicating with nature. I've had a couple of interactions with a pair of flies that got caught in my office, and I got one of them to sit on my hand so I could take him outside, and the other one tried to do the same thing. But we didn't quite manage that. And you have had numerous experiences and have report numerous experiences with animals of all kinds, including snakes, elands, and elephants. Could you tell us something about those stories, please?
Yeah, sure. There was a period of my life, where I was quite involved, with rational scientific endeavor, and was really doing everything possible, to work towards a PhD in fisheries science and doing all the statistics around that. My background has been largely in conservation and environmental science. But there was a particular time in my life, and I might start with this experience because it was the one that sort of opened the gateway for a lot of the other experiences that you spoke about. And it was back in 2006 when I was finishing my master's degree in environmental science and set to go into a PhD when a close friend of mine, Chris John, unexpectedly died in a hiking accident in Iceland. And I was, absolutely shattered. It's that moment you get where, the moment everyone hates when, a friend gets onto the line and just sobs out and blurts out, such and such has passed away. And so I grabbed my bicycle and went into the woods, and I just sat there. I found a little clearing in the afternoon sunshine and sat there and didn't really know what to do at that stage. And I guess you just go back to your fallback mechanism, and many of us coming somewhere along the line, had a Christian indoctrination. I just sort of did a little prayer and sort of said, well, Christian, I hope you're okay. I don't know what I was trying to think with that because obviously he'd passed away, but I guess there was some part of me that was seeing that there was something beyond his physical life. And within 30 seconds of voicing that quietly, 3 dragonflies, one by one, landed on me. And it was mystifying. And I was bewildered for a moment. I didn't really know what to do with it. And one landed on my forehead, one on my shoulder, one on my forearm. And I just expected them to go off any moment. Originally I thought, well, this can't be, they're just passing by and off they go. And they stayed, and they stayed for the longest time. And this is back in the days before selfies, but I happened to have my pocket camera in my bag, and at one stage I thought, well, this is crazy, and I leant in and picked out my camera and actually snapped a shot to sort of prove to myself in the future that it was real as I remembered it, and they still stayed there. And then I just processed. I soaked up the experience, and one by one they left me eventually. There was just this incredible emotional release, and it was an experience at that time which actually shattered the rational life I'd been living in. I had an interest in my earlier life, with sort of the Earth mysteries, and there was something more, but I'd been really shelving that for quite some time. And I was able to. I took that experience back to friends, and just sort of tried to validate it with them, and they all concurred that it was quite non-ordinary, particularly because I was nowhere near water or anything like that. So that's one of the key ones, and then since then I guess one's alert, and that led the way to my PhD research. It was a roundabout way, but I got there eventually, where one portion of that research looked into these encounters, not just my own, but many others as well.
That I've been writing about the conditions in which coincidences are more likely to happen, and the 3 characteristics include major life changes, and you lost a friend, high emotion, and you were grieving the loss of him, and need, which is you needed some reassurance somehow that maybe he continued. And that was that experience with the dragonflies confirms again what I've been able to observe. Later in your life, several years later, you were taking a hike and entered a clearing, and another dragonfly landed on you, and you left that area and came back, and a dragonfly returned to you. That begins to make me wonder what dragonflies mean to you, because I like to interpret symbols like this, and much like Jung and the scarab, the dragonfly may mean something to you. I would guess it does. So what does a dragonfly mean to you?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I hadn't, for a lot of my research, I often stopped at that there is some sort of meaning without really plumbing it. But now that the dragonflies have happened a couple of times, particularly as you alluded to, actually earlier this year, they somehow speak to elements of the soul for me, and I think the soul is an interesting concept here because I quite like the interpretation given by Bill Plotkin, which sort of says that it refers to our ultimate place in life, or our sort of niche in the Earth community. And in some ways, when we have these coincidences, it really does feel like some part of our soul is being activated in terms of our place on this life. And so, having the dragonfly this year, like you say, with those three key things, which I entirely agree with, there was this transition point where I was actually going into a solo fast and what have you, and there was sort of a realigning happening in that moment when the dragonflies landed. So it really did feel this sort of coherence was happening as I was going, sort of deepening my connection with nature in that moment, stepping out of an urban world, going into nature. And the funny thing in that moment was I was actually seeing the dragonflies and reflecting again on my friend, and almost sort of joking or challenging the dragonfly. Well, are you? Because I hadn't had an experience like that for so long. So there was also that this idea that some part of my psyche was, say, reaching out into the world in some kind of way. So I also, for me, dragonflies have also been a sign of sort of emotional release as well, and this boundary between worlds, a world that's still a bit shadowy, a bit mystery, which I don't entirely understand, but certainly speaks to that part of myself.
The dragonflies in each of the two stories landed on you, and that means they touched you. And from the way you're describing them, I'm going to say touched you in more than a physical sense, but more in a soul sense, and connected you to something greater, something larger. And that first one in 2006 with the three dragonflies changed the course of your career, and that's a major touch. We're coming to the end of this segment, and we will continue to talk about dragonflies and other animals as we discuss nature and realigning nature and human beings with Matthew Zylstra. You are listening to Connecting with Coincidence. I'm your host, Dr. Bernie Beitman, MD, on the X-Zone Broadcast Network.
It's hard to listen to the news without realizing we're living in volatile, unprecedented times. Yet never has there been such an opportunity to transform the human condition. As old structures fail, where can we find the guidance to co-create a better way? Find Your Path Home is an ever-evolving, leading-edge information, education, and healing resource center designed to support and guide you on your path to unity and enlightenment. Based on sound principles employed by shamans worldwide, we provide techniques that can support you through the current transitions, offering online shamanic classes, international long-distance shamanic healing sessions, complimentary Mission Evolution radio episodes and Stairway to Heaven TV vignettes, seminars, retreats, and much more. All of this can be found on findyourpathhome.com.
So I was watching the X Zone TV channel last night when I was abducted by aliens, and they kept repeating to me over and over again, simultv.com, simultv.com.
What's simultv.com?
That's what I asked them. They had it written on the side of their UFO.
How do you spell that?
UFO.
No, I mean simultv.com.
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 Right. simultv.com.
Interesting that you were abducted by aliens in a simultv.com UFO last night.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. Now that you mention it, I remember now last night I was awakened from a deep sleep. My great-grandmother was standing there. She said she come from the hereafter to tell me about simultv.com. She even spelled it out for me.
simultv.com, sonny boy.
simultv.com.
simultv.com, sonny boy.
Wow.
Yeah.
Guys, you'll never guess what my psychic guru just told me.
simultv.com.
Exactly. Are you guys psychic too?
Of course.
We all know about simultv.com. simultv.com.
Shamanic healing is the key to personal empowerment. Why? All 4 levels of our being, physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual, must be addressed for us to enjoy balanced, healthy, abundant lives. Yet there are few provisions for spiritual or energetic healing. Shamanism, found at the root of all cultures, is a very effective spiritual healing modality. To find quality shamanic healing you can trust, regardless of where you live, look no further than Find Your Path Home long-distance shamanic healing program. All Path Home long-distance healing practitioners have been trained and certified through Path Home Shamanic Art School. Change your life. Live abundantly. Schedule a long-distance shamanic healing session with Wilda Wieka or one of her quality practitioners today at findyourpathhome.com.
Welcome back to CC with BB. I am your host, Dr. Bernie Beitman, MD, and we are coming to you on the X Zone Broadcast Network. And we're talking to Matthew Zylstra about nature and reimagining the human being-nature relationship. How are the synchronicities that are nature-based different from other kinds of coincidences in general?
I just want to start with when I came into this research, I guess what I was noticing was that all types of synchronicities were bundled together. And I mean, I didn't know if that was a problem or not, but based on my own experiences and as I started to hear anecdotal experiences, I realized that perhaps phenomenologically, which means, the experience of, they may actually be different in terms of their impact on our lives. And so particularly with nature-based, I was interested and had a sense that they might have more of an impact in terms of how we relate to the more than human world. And a lot of, study on personal experiences and particularly synchronicity, at least at that time when I started this, tended toward anthropocentrism and I would say somewhat of an individualism as well in terms of one's own individual journey.
Yeah, it's all about me.
It's all about me. Yeah,
it's all about me, and that is changing. I'd like to be able to say. I went to a meeting of the Serendipity Society, and in Serendipities, discoveries are made by this one hero who does something great, but they are recognizing the dependence of that particular hero on the environment in which that person is acting. So I'm glad to hear you talking about this too. This anthrocentricism and selfness got to change. So please go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. That's great to hear that. So like the idea was, well, can these types of synchronicities actually shift us into a more relational way of being? And part of this came because a lot of my other research has been focused on nature connectedness and the importance of a sense of connection. So I was wondering, well, how effectively does synchronicity open the doorway to a sense of connection and particularly connection with non-human nature? And there's a lot of literature talking about the sense of separation that humanity finds themselves in, and I've also wrote a bit on that. So that was sort of part of the impetus. And what I found with these types of synchronicities is that, firstly, they were more effective or more powerful in opening up a sense of nature connection. So I did, aside from my qualitative research, I also did some quantitative research looking at, people who have meaningful nature experiences. Are they more connected with nature, and how does it affect their environmental behaviour? And so I was also specifically looking at, well, people who have synchronicity as a meaningful nature experience, do they report that they're more connected with nature? And they were more so than people who just had a meaningful nature experience, which wasn't necessarily synchronicity. So that was one difference. But the other sense was really...
How do you define synchronicity in nature now for our audience?
Yeah. So the way I defined it was it's a notable experience of two or more physical or psychological events of comparable content coinciding in an unlikely, so no normal cause, and meaningful way, whereby at least one event prominently involves non-human nature phenomena. Mm-hmm. Now, I mean, I understand it's problematic. If you take this all the way, firstly, it kind of creates an artificial separation, which we really need to try to avoid. But in order to sort of see our connection, we have to sort of stand apart from the unity, to be able to see that. And so, I mean, that's one of the paradoxes. Yeah. But the other thing is, people might take it all the way to the end point and say, well, everything is connected. There is a unity. We are all one, and there shouldn't be that separation. But again, what happens is that we can, just because of the persuasions of our own experience and being enamored with ourselves as humans, we tend to find that our own human experience can dilute nature. And, there's something about having these moments with nature that really give a sense of humility, a diminishment of a part of ourself, and some sort of new relationship with the other, in this case the non-human other, which other experiences don't tend to do. Very good. At least that's what I found in my research. Yeah.
Oh, very, very good. Very good. That it's not just about us. When you have an experience like this, there are really conscious beings out there. And what do you think of what I described at the top of the show about my relationship with the trees? Because what I've read, at least what I've read of yours, is mostly with animals, not with plants that you are describing things. But I'm sure you have plant coincidences as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I recorded quite a lot of them. And actually there were a few that were very similar to what you described, where there is a sense of communication taking place. I think there's something about an animal that is quite primordial, and we relate to that in a different kind of way. Also, because we can see ourselves perhaps in the animal. There's a sense of intelligence there, which is more easy to access and more easy to be seen. Whereas with plants and trees, it's a bit more difficult. But increasingly, I am hearing these experiences like yours, and I find them fascinating. What I was focusing on with my research was really on the experience. So, the idea that there's value in the experiences itself. So a lot of synchronicity research would go ahead to causalities or justifications and maybe say that it's telepathic. But what I was trying to do was looking at the experience, and whether it's real or not is irrelevant. But this was a huge epiphany for me in my research, was that whether it's real or not is irrelevant, but the important thing is that the interpretation exists, and that has a causal effect on attitudes and behavior toward the environment and like how we are in the world. And it also served as a bit of an escape clause for me, being in a very natural science context, because I didn't have to then say, well, Bernard's communicating with trees. I could say he's experiencing that, and whether or not we like it or not, that is very much affecting your being in the world in some kind of way.
That's such a very, very important distinction you're making there. It's good science what you're doing, You're not making causal hypotheses, as I will, in doing that those trees are communicating with me but that's my experience, and I can't prove it any other way but to say it was my experience. So it's a great place to be for your starting.
Yeah. And I mean, one of the big themes that was coming out when I was coding all these experiences was people were experiencing it as some sort of interspecies communication.
Yeah.
And I mean, the likes of, in Australia, there's Monica Gagliano, Dr. Gagliano, and some of the research she's doing on trees and plants is perhaps nudging us towards the idea that maybe these experiences will, soon have enough evidence to suggest that there is a communication taking place as you describe it. But, what synchronicity at the moment allows us to do is to say, well, we don't have a causal explanation as yet, but there's something within that that's actually important in itself. And let's be with that and let's stay with that for a while and see what it means to the individual.
And you're very practical in your ecological drive. You want to get human beings to have more respect for nature than we do. And what I think you're saying is that these experiences, however they might be caused, humble us and give us greater respect for nature and hopefully treat nature better than we have been doing.
That's the ideal. Yeah. I mean, that's what I hope for. I think we need to all hope for that. And that was borne out in the research. I mean, people were self-reporting, so ideally you would do a longitudinal analysis to see. But, all indications from what people were self-reporting was that these meaningful nature experiences, whether synchronicity or not, were having this kind of impact on people's relationship with Earth. And, you mentioned your experience with flies at the beginning of the program. And I think that's very important because one of the things I found that, say, synchronicity as a meaningful nature experience does, as opposed to another nature experience, is that it can transcend speciesism. And a lot of ecologists can bemoan the fact that we all want, our totem animal to be an elephant or a wolf or something like that. So the charismatic species win out. But I also had an experience with insects, particularly with mosquitoes, and it changed my perception of them forever. So it's interesting that when you have an experience like you said with flies, normally we disregard them. It can have the impact that you don't ever see flies the same way again, because perhaps you realize that they have the potential to intervene in your life in a particular way to bring some sort of meaning or message or insight.
Well, I was trying to help them get out and get out of my office because they were getting kind of tired and hungry, having been there for a couple of days. So I talked to the flies. I said, I'm your only way out. You can't get out of here without me. It was like I was talking to somebody in prison, and I was trying to offer them some way to get to freedom. And somehow the first fly trusted me enough after a while, and the second fly seemed to have learned from the first fly and got to my hand faster than the first one had.
Fantastic. Beautiful.
Thank you. It has changed my ideas. They're conscious beings, those things, and we can communicate with them. We're coming to the end of this segment, and we're talking about nature and encouraging you, our audience, to get out there and keep open to the idea that your mind and the mind of the insects and animals around you are interested in making connections. You're listening to Connecting with Coincidence. I'm your host, Dr. Bernie Beitman, MD on the X Zone Broadcast Network. We are talking to Matthew Zylstra.
Whether you're a skeptic or a believer, join me, Rob McConnell, as together we'll investigate the world of the paranormal and the science of parapsychology here on the X Zone Radio TV show on XZBN and the X Zone TV channel on Simul TV. Since 1990, the X Zone Radio TV show has been the place where people dare to believe and dare to be heard. Together, we'll investigate UFOs, aliens, ghosts, Bigfoot, psychic phenomenon, lake monsters, conspiracy theories, government cover-ups, the truth embargo, alien abductions, ESP, haunted locations from around the world, and so much more. With over 28 years of broadcasting and more than 4,500 individual guests, the X Zone is truly a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality, as evidenced by the credibility, integrity, and professionalism of the guests that we bring to our international audience. If you have seen a UFO, had a close encounter, seen a ghost, Bigfoot, lake monster, or a story that you would like to share or have investigated, contact me, Rob McConnell, by sending me your email to xzone@xzoneradiotv.com, or you can call toll-free 1-800-610-7035, extension 143, and on Skype, X Zone Radio TV. For more information on the X Zone Radio TV show with yours truly, Rob McConnell, visit www.xzoneradiotv.com or www.xzonetvchannel.com or simultv.com and xzbn.net. Until next we meet here in the X Zone from our broadcast center and studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, always remember, X Zone Nation, keep your eyes to the sky and your heart in the light.
Doom, doom, ba-bum, ba-boom, boom. Welcome back to Connecting with Coincidence. I'm your host, Dr. Bertie Beitman, MD, and we are talking about nature synchronicities with Matthew Zylstra from Plettenberg Bay in South Africa. Matthew, you've done a PhD research project on synchronicity and nature, and in your appendix, you got to some ideas that might be interesting to our audience, some findings that maybe aren't standard but are probably worth discussing. Could you tell us some of those findings, please?
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason why they were put in the appendices.
Yeah.
But, yeah. I mean, as I said, I was, focusing on the experience and not the causalities. But, part of this exploration is to bring out common themes and, also to, move from a subjective experience to an intersubjective experience. So without objectivity, the best we can hope for is intersubjective experiences, which helps us maybe have some idea what's going on. And a former student of mine randomly handed me this tome of a book by a gentleman called Manly Hall. It's from 1926, and it was called The Secret Teachings of All Ages. An encyclopedic outline of Masonic, Kabbalistic, and Rosicrucian symbolic philosophy. And I was like, whoa, what's this? Anyway, I was flipping through it, and one thing caught my attention was Hall speaks about this idea that winged creatures, or there are certain creatures capable of functioning in two or more elements, so either in earth or in air or in water or on earth, and that these were seen as being messages of spirits between these planes. And, what was interesting is that the Greeks also had this idea that, that birds were sort of omens of the spirits. And, I mean, interestingly also here on the continent of Africa, I mean, very few people will be talking about synchronicity, but a lot of people would be talking about messages from the ancestors. So what I was keen to do was look at, how many of my synchronicities actually involved winged creatures, and actually, and then also how many of my meaningful nature experiences were with mammals. And there was a distinct clustering when I sort of developed networks. There was a distinct clustering that the synchronicities were more likely to be involving insects, birds, or any. Or maybe some amphibious creature, and I just thought it was an interesting sort of link, basically. And one idea that that was also put in Hall's book, and which I think Jung and Freud also explored a bit, was that what they called the lower kingdoms of nature, which were less evolved and more simply constituted, could respond most readily to the impulses of the gods. And what I could also take as that is perhaps if we do look at the fact that there's some sort of psychical transference, with these deep emotional states that we activate in our psyche, I know authors have spoken about how it feels like that the deepest parts of our psyche reach out and sort of grab reality. And I've often wondered whether these simple, these other forms of nature could be more reactive to our own impulses. But on the other hand, I also want to make that sort of ontological turn and not say that everything around is just dancing in our own creation. Perhaps the more and more we find out about animals, we find out that they may also be sensitive and attentive to our own sort of emotions and place in life. And perhaps, your mammals and your larger animals can pick up on that side of things more easily. So, yeah, that was quite curious. And it also validates some of the indigenous belief systems as well.
I think I'm trying to understand what you just said. I thought you were going to say that maybe some of these animals are using us for their own purposes.
I wouldn't rule that out at all. And it would be a wonderful thought to think that, to be honest, because, everything about what we tend to do is, for our own purposes and our own sort of, individuation or evolution or becoming a better person. I do have a sense that, that animals seek out us as well. And perhaps, again, like your own experience with the flies, the first one, got a ticket out of jail, and the second one said, well, I'll come across and try and experience the same. So, there are whole realms opening up here scientifically, that we don't yet quite understand, but there's more and more evidence suggesting that animals have a whole lot more to them than we've given them credit for.
Oh yeah, and I'm with the trees because
the trees, of course. Yeah.
Well, that's my particular area. I do trees. I do animals too, but it's the trees, and those trees talk to me. And you could say I did it myself, is to try to help save their fellow trees because one of the big power companies is cutting down trees south of Charlottesville to put in some gas thing that is not necessary, a gas pipeline. It really isn't necessary. It's all for money, and people are trying to protest against this, and I participated in a program, the Dr. Coincidence Song and Dance Show that I put on, where we gave the proceeds to the protests because the trees had encouraged me to do that.
That is, it's a beautiful story, and if those sorts of relationships are informing and serving in that way, then they need to be encouraged. And a lot of my colleagues in conservation. Traditional conservation, would spurn these ideas, and I get it, and I understand it, and I was reluctant for a long, long time. But again, we come back to the interpretation, and if conservation, and I hate it being secularized like that, but we'll keep it as it is. But if conservation wants or needs people to act in the way they hope for, they need to be open to all sorts of relationships with nature, and a lot of those come, from an emotive or heart space or a spiritual space, and they can't be shelved off as saying, well, we'll only take those ones and we won't take those ones. Right. If it's helping, to bring us into relation with the planet, we need everything we can at the moment.
It's a difficult transition for regular scientists to think that the trees might have enough of a consciousness to be able to communicate out. And I've read a bunch of books about trees and how they interact with each other, and the fungi under the ground that connect them. But very rarely do I see, which I saw a description of a person in the Amazon climbing a tree and having to put spikes in it and apologizing to the tree for putting the spikes in for what he needed to be able to do, and recognizing that the tree was responding to him. But he's like not our Western mind, so he can do that. But I know this. I know from my own experience as best as I can that there is a consciousness in many trees, and they are trying to communicate with us. And what you're doing is getting us in a step in that direction, but you're doing it in a nice systematic way where you're starting with phenomenology first. Yeah,
I'd love to go all the way and be able to validate these things more. And I know there are researchers out there doing that. I have a colleague who's doing her postdoc on this kind of thing, but a step further, looking at this intuitive communication with nature and really taking more of your experiences and actually doing things with them to see, what can we learn from it. So, and I would say even giving them more empiricism or at least more validity as something in themselves. So that's happening, and I, may go there in the future myself. But at least at this point, and this is one of the things that synchronicity does when. One of the challenges with an experience like yours is that I might see you as an external observer looking at a tree, and you might be saying, "Man, I'm having this incredible experience right now. I'm communicating with it," but there's no sort of objective means to validate that. Whereas sometimes when we have these synchronicities with other people, even with animals, somebody else can actually witness it. So it can almost become like it's not objective, but it becomes the next best thing to some sort of objective view of reality. So, that's why it was good, because it can become a shared experience. It can be observable, but absolutely that shouldn't take away the sort of experiences which you're speaking of, because they are bringing us into empathetic relation with the world and respect. And it seems to me, and what I found out in my research as well, is that when we enter nature with a shift in our consciousness through respect, through reverence, perhaps through some sort of ritual, with an opening of an awareness, these experiences are more likely to happen.
Yes, very much more likely to happen. I see what you mean about objective, because I had to guess about whether I was making it up, talking with the trees, and sometimes they were pretty funny with me, telling me, well, you think you're talking to us, well, do you think something else is true, which was even a lower probability than talking to them? So which do you think might be more probable, says the tree? This other thing or talking to us? And I said, well, okay. It seemed like it's going to be more like talking to you seems like it could be happening, but it's still so subjective. And you could take a photograph of the dragonfly sitting on your cap. So you had evidence that dragonfly was there. You didn't have a movie of it. You would have with our current phones, but you didn't. But at least you had a picture, and that's the kind of evidence that good research requires. So this subjective thing is a problem when talking to immovable things like plants, but sometimes with other kinds of plants, you can see the leaves moving. And a friend of mine's much more tuned in than I am, and she was telling me once, those plants over there are laughing with you, because she could tell by the way the leaves were moving. We're coming to the end of this segment. We're talking with Matthew Zylstra about synchronicity in nature. It's a wonderful discussion. You're listening to Connecting with Coincidence. I'm your host, Dr. Bernie Beitman, MD, on the X-Zone Broadcast Network.
If you are looking for a safe, zero-calorie natural option to the harmful artificial sweeteners on the market today, Just Like Sugar is what you're looking for. Just Like Sugar is a wonderful natural alternative for those health-conscious people who choose a calorie-restricted diet with a great, pure, sweet flavor that tastes just like sugar. Just Like Sugar is a great natural option for people suffering from diabetes and may be useful in restricted diet programs where standard sugars are not allowed and does not cause a laxative effect of some other sweeteners. Just Like Sugar comprises a perfect blend of chicory root fiber, natural calcium, natural vitamin C, and Just Like Sugar's sweetness comes from the natural flavors from the peel of the orange. Just Like Sugar is a natural alternative to harmful artificial sweeteners and will change the way that you believe all natural sweetener products taste. Just Like Sugar is available at your local Whole Foods markets, Wild Oats markets, Henry's, Sun Harvest, and many other fine natural food stores in the U.S., Canada, and worldwide. They are here, and they've been here for thousands of years, making their presence known in the shadows. They might be seen by a lonely motorist on a deserted road late at night, or by a frightened and confused husband in the bedroom he is sharing with his wife. But who are they? What do they want? Why are they here? Perhaps most concerning, has the government been aware of their presence all along? The new book by rel-mar, UFO Disclosure, the 70-year cover-up exposed, delves into the world of UFOs. Can full disclosure be soon? Order now and receive a free hour and 37-minute DVD on the UFO phenomenon. UFOs are real. Get both the book and the DVD, a $40 value, for only $19.99. To order your book and DVD today, go to rel-marzulli.net. That's LAMARZULLI.net.
You have heard of the X Zone? Now watch it on Simul TV, plus 500 video games, live TV channels, free video on demand, worldwide, and more. Does this sound like tomorrow's television? Well, it is, but you can have it today, right now. It is Simul TV. Simul TV offers what the others only wish they could provide. 15 exclusive channels like X Zone, sci-fi, and horror. We are worldwide. No other provider offers that. 500 built-in video games. No need to have an extra expensive system. We have them included. Free video on demand. Live streaming events from around the world, interactive online network, and much more. Tomorrow's TV today. Simul TV. Sound too good to be true? Well, it's not. You can have Simul TV today. Sign up at simultv.com. Do it today.
Memorable dynamic presentations are a not-so-secret weapon in the business world. Do you have a powerful message that must be shared, but you haven't found a way to deliver that message? Do you want to be known as a top public speaker who gets amazing results? Are you ready to create and deliver your powerful message? Thomas Hides can help you create and deliver your speech to get the results you desire. Visit iconquality.com.
Did you expect your business to flourish, but instead it plateaued or didn't get off the ground yet? Would you like to achieve massive goals and discover new sources of income within your business? When you're ready to experience that type of success with fast results, Cindy Hendricks is the business coach for you. Her work with entrepreneurs and business owners has been life-changing. To get you and your business where you want to be, go to imaginemoresuccess.com.
Has the fear of public speaking stalled your business or personal life? What would you give to develop and maintain supreme confidence? Have an invaluable private program to always perform at your best. Imagine how you would feel. You can have all that and so much more today with Thomas Hides' life-changing course called Number One Fear Unleashed. Visit numberonefear.com and be liberated from your fear of public speaking.
Welcome back to CC with BB. Yes, I'm your host, Dr. Bernie Beitman, MD, and we are traveling out into nature, finding amazing coincidences out there, too. Matthew Zylstra has done a PhD on synchronicity in nature, meaningful nature experiences, he calls them. And Matthew, you have several stories about elands and elephants and snakes. Could you tell us one of those that really struck you as a part of your research?
You mean from other people or from myself?
Either one, other people or yourself.
Yeah, the experience that stands out for me was actually one that I recall in detail in my dissertation because it had so many of the elements that we speak about. It wasn't just with an animal; it was also with landscape. It wasn't just simultaneously in time, but it was spread out over time. And it also, what was important was that there was a series of events which actually had the same thematic content. And it was a colleague of mine who's now become a colleague of mine, but at the time I didn't know him, And I called him to do an interview because I'd heard he'd had sort of incredible experiences throughout Africa with his filmmaking and what have you. And I made the interview. And then when I actually sat down for the interview, he had just had this experience. So it was very fresh in his mind. It happened 3 days earlier, which was fantastic because from doing a lived experience research, it was very fresh. And he had been swimming every day in the cold oceans around here. And he used to sort of do his swimming with breathing exercises and what have you. And he had cultivated sort of a dialogue with the ocean, expressing thanks, but he hadn't been feeling so good and it wasn't really working for him. And on this particular day, it just, everything clicked. And he felt this absolute sense of oneness, and he felt he was having this dialogue with the ocean, just as you were explaining with the trees. And it just felt fantastic. And then in that moment, an otter appeared. Now, he had been swimming every day for 7 months. He had never seen an otter, and he knew that otters would only come out at dawn or dusk usually. And he was one feeding right in front of him, and he, jumped in the water. And this other otter then approached him, touched him, felt his body, for the longest time. And he was just, so overwhelmed from emotion through that experience. And what was so synchronous from him was he was like, it just seemed too much of a coincidence that should happen on the day that he had the deepest connection with Earth and with himself of the whole year.
Yeah.
And so he had these feelings. And then what happened from them was 3 days later, he gets a call from his mother, who lives 30 kilometers away on the other side of the bay. And she had also had an otter experience, and she'd only just started swimming, and so, he was like, what's going on here, there. Yeah. And then to further the story, when I visited him for a follow-up interview several months later, we went for a kayak before the interview, and we had an otter encounter in the middle of the day. The otter came to the kayak. And so, the ecologist in me wants to know, well, is this normal behavior? This is a key thing. And what I like about nature-based synchronicities is that they should awaken that curiosity for us to know, so that nature moves out more than just being this wall of green, but we actually start to wonder, well, is that normal for otters? Is that normal for dragonflies? So we can also start to learn about nature as well, because, sometimes it could be normal. But for this, it really, we both know things pretty well, know the ecology of the system pretty well, and we've, years since, we've never had these kind of experiences again. And if they have happened, they've happened in these interesting or strange kind of circumstances when something, has happened. So, that's one that I thought was quite incredible, just because it involved multiple types of synchronicity in this one event that's joined. And one thing that's tricky about these synchronicities is that you take one by themselves and they may not appear that wow to somebody, but you take a series, that can be very, very meaningful. And that was the case, here as well.
I really like that one. And I'm into causality or explanation. I'm writing a chapter for a new book on explanation for coincidences. And this one makes me wonder. I start coming up with pictures about how it happened. And I wonder what you thought. You're a good scientist, but you also are open to wondering. And what do you think? What do you think happened? That there would be 3 otter experiences involved with this one person, his mother, and then with you.
Yeah, obviously, like in my written work and what I've researched, I haven't gone there, but but obviously, as a good scientist, you want to. The curiosity is awoken in me. What's going on here?
Yeah.
And I've certainly been inspired by some of Dean Radin's interpretations here. That also, that there seems to be this waveform of possibilities, and that at some point, through the way we cultivate intention and attention, we reach out or perhaps solidify one of those possibilities in this waveform of all possibilities. And when I speak of the waveform, I sort of think of this double slit experiment, the idea that once we observe something, some sort of outcome manifests. But, that kind of works okay it's still so hard to grasp, and particularly when this animal has agency themselves, So we could say the otter, was actually in an empathetic relationship, and perhaps the behavior that he experienced with the otter is not that abnormal going back 100,000 years when we were so much more connected with nature. Perhaps that happened all the time, and the otter is now saying, you remember, you finally dropped your ego and you remembered your connection with Earth, and this is what it's like to be with humans when we understand each other. I mean, that's perhaps that side of things, but the fact that the same symbology and the content should then appear with another otter 30 kilometers away, and then should then appear 6 months later, that sort of symbology, becomes quite difficult to disentangle in terms of the causality going on there.
Well, I'll tell you my images of this, because I think in like videos, and collapsing the wave function is just a nice idea that really takes me very little, gives me a little help. It gets used so much to explain things. They don't even know what the wave function is. They don't know where the electron is when it's being collapsed, or the photon. It's a problem. But in this one, your colleague, as he became, entered into a new state of awareness and consciousness with the ocean. He was one with the ocean. He was with the ocean, and I've been doing that sometimes too, but not this deeply. And in that moment, the otter, which, as you were talking about, like flying things, the otter can do both water and ground. Exactly. And the otter came out of the ground to the water, or right at the edge of water and ground, and that's where he was, and he was open to everything. And the otter, for whatever reason, it was an otter. It wasn't. I could play with the term otter, but I won't right now. But the otter was like there with him, and maybe saying, I am showing you, and we are part of you, and you are part of us, because you are. And because I use this term simulpathity to say that people who are closely connected with each other can feel the pain of the other one at a distance. Simulpathity, feeling it. And so it can not only just pain, but there's him, and then his mother is also by the water, and his mother then becomes part of what he's experiencing, and she picks up what he's experiencing, so the otters around her can then come out to her the way the otter came out to him, because she's parallel vibrating the way he was vibrating. And then when he was with you in the kayak, then you re-evoked those old feelings. You brought with him the reminder, and you had it in you, the feeling of his description, and you could then reverberate with him, that then brought the same vibration out, that they allowed the otter that was there to say, okay, you're part of us again.
I like that a lot. And I think, this idea of reverberation, of vibration, of frequency makes a lot of sense. And it does have some currency, within our scientific worldview as well. And that's actually how it feels like as well.
Yeah,
and we focus on the experience. Yeah. That really is how it feels like. We feel we've changed the channel. We feel we've tuned in. these are also the words we use. Yeah. And it almost starts to feel like that certain animals are perhaps on that certain emotional frequency. And like the word emotion itself, is sort of energy, emotion, like it's that heart coherence. And it's like that certain animals appear when we need them, and they have certain symbolism that, that really speaks to what our, vibration is at that moment. My own personal experiences and what we see in research seems to play that out experientially as well.
We have about a minute left, and my theory these days is that we have maybe in our skin receptors for a kind of energy that's around us that we don't know we have the receptors for, but we do feel things. I particularly know that from dance, when I'm dancing with people or in a dance environment, but it happens a lot of other places where I can feel the energy around me. And so I'm hypothesizing that we have energy information receptors that have yet to be defined.
Yeah, I think so. Or we've lost our connection to those. We really need to get out of our head more and really come into a more embodied relationship with Earth. And by doing that, I think we might reawaken those very senses, which we probably had, 50, 100,000 years ago. I think in some ways we're only a fraction of the humans we could be. And my hope is that these experiences open up dialogue into what we could be as humans.
Keep up the excellent work, Matthew. Keep up the excellent work. You've been listening to Connecting with Coincidence. I'm your host, Dr. Bernie Buttman, MD, on the X Zone Broadcast Network. We've had a great conversation with Matthew Zylstra.